Hello, I'm Paul Badham. I'm a chartered building surveyor at Harrison Clark Chartered Surveyors, and today we're going to be talking about the repairing covenants in your lease. Under the terms of most leases, you will normally be required to undertake some repairs. The standard of repair required can vary from lease to lease, so you should check your lease for the exact wording, or your dilapidations surveyor will do so on your behalf. The most common wording is that the tenant will need to keep the property in good and substantial repair. We'll look at what this means in more detail shortly. When considering the repairing covenant, it is critically important to understand exactly which areas of the property are demised to you. Normally, this detail will be near the front of the lease, and if you have a true fully repairing and insuring lease, often known as an FRI lease, you will be responsible for looking after the entire building and any grounds. The difficulty often comes when you lease only part of the building, as every lease is different and leases can give conflicting signals. For example, in one lease recently, the lease said that the tenant was responsible for repairing the windows. However, the lease plan clearly showed that the windows were excluded from the leased areas. In this case, it appeared that the reference to windows in the written lease was an error, as the lease plan should take precedence. As you can imagine, very small and subtle variances can have significant consequences. So to establish whether an item meets the required standard of repair, we need to ask 4 questions. The first one is the item covered by the repair covenant? This will depend on the exact wording of your lease, which we have just discussed. Secondly, is the item in a damaged or deteriorated condition? This might seem an odd question, but sometimes elements are performing as designed, but they are not as performing as well as modern alternatives. When considering whether something is in a deteriorated condition, this is measured against the building's original construction, not as it was at the beginning of the lease. Thirdly, if the item is damaged or in a deteriorated condition, is it so bad that it falls below the standard required by the lease? Substantial repair does not mean perfect repair, so this is sometimes tricky to assess. But in considering whether the lease requirement has been met, the age, character and location of the premises is also considered. Fourthly, what needs to be done to bring that item up to the right standard? Only work necessary to bring the item to the required standard needs to be completed, even if slightly more work would be desirable. For example, if a roof can be patch repaired, a court may reject a claim for a full re-roof. Generally, a court would consider what a reasonable surveyor would recommend to be an appropriate repair in those circumstances. Fifthly, was the work of a type that could be reasonably have been expected by the parties? It might, for example, not be appropriate for a short-term tenant to complete a major rebuilding works which would have become necessary during their short lease term as a consequence of a long-standing neglect. As you can see, just ascertaining whether breaches have occurred is not always straightforward. We commonly hear from tenants that they do not understand why the landlord is asking for the building to be repaired when it is in a better condition than it was at the start of their lease. As I explained earlier, good repair is not a comparison between the condition of the property at lease commencement and now. It is much more complex than that. To make matters worse, as common law has developed, it is generally accepted that even if the lease says keep the property in good repair, there is an implicit put and in the phrase, such that a covenant to keep the property in good repair in fact means that the property must first be put into good repair and kept that way. Not always. Luckily, there are ways to limit your repairing liability. The first and most common method is to append a photographic schedule of condition to your lease. This can be used to modify the repairing clause such that the property does not need to be returned to the landlord in any better state of repair than is shown in that schedule. A small outlay on a photographic schedule of condition at the lease commencement can save thousands in the longer term. When negotiating your lease, it might be possible to require your landlord to maintain certain additional parts of the building, either at their own cost or under a service charge, where the cost of repair can be shared. You could also negotiate with your landlord to confirm that the fittings are already on their last legs, and that they could be completely excluded from the repairing liability and handed back in a non-functional condition. When this occurs, this would usually happen in a situation where the landlord is likely to complete a significant property refurbishment after your lease term, which could render your repairs valueless. All of these strategies must be considered before entering the lease, and for this reason we recommend speaking with a specialist dilapidation surveyor prior to entering your lease, rather than waiting until the lease end when the options to limit your liability are significantly fewer. The first thing is not to panic. Our team of highly qualified surveyors can be contacted on 02381 550 051 and we're pleased to discuss your claim, as well as strategies to reduce it. Often we are able to significantly reduce your liability even if you did not take advice before entering your lease. Similarly, we would be pleased to review a proposed lease and give you advice before you enter it. You should also take a look at our video on leaseholder surveys, which we use to provide formal and client-specific advice on dilapidations, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.